Call to order the meeting of the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District Board of Managers, December 20th, 2018. I'm sorry I'm the only person in the room with a Christmas sweater. You know we got the memo. Is there any member of the public who wishes to address the board in a matter that's not on the agenda or on the consent agenda? I see no hands. The next item here is approval of the agenda, and we are going to add an action item for something that was a late developing matter. Should we call it 11-1 or 11-8, Mr. Whisker? You have a preference? Or?
Let's go 11-1.
Sure.
I get a vote.
Is there a second?
Second.
Those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right. Making a note to myself so I don't forget. In the information items in our packet, we have an update status report on the local water management plan, so I thank Ms. Clark for that. We're moving along. On the consent agenda, we have approval of the December 13th board minutes, approval of the general checking account check register and the surety account, and two additional items, Resolution 18-124, which is approval of the 2019 calendar, and Resolution 18-125, which is authorization to purchase power cords for the aeration unit operation. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? Manager Miller, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Becker, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I don't have a report this evening. It's only been a week since we were here last. Manager Miller, could you give a report from Policy and Planning Committee?
We had an overview of the Carver County, Victoria planning effort, and I think there's a tremendous amount of work that's got to be done yet, policy and policy and planning both, but it represents some pretty ambitious efforts. It's going to take a lot of time and a lot of partners, but I think we're off to a good start. And we also got a report on improvements that are proposed for Minnehaha Creek in the city of Minneapolis, with all the normal levels of participation by the citizens, the park, the city, and everybody else. So that's going to be a long process, but an ambitious one that we're going to keep informed on that.
Thank you. Are there other events or meetings managers want to report on? The upcoming meeting and event schedule is in the calendar, no longer tentative because we have just approved the calendar, so we can lock these dates in. Item 10.1 is permit 18670. Ms. Showalter.
Thank you, President White, managers. I'm going to be presenting this evening on permit 18670, which is emergency release structure 4, MN 344 tunnel. There we go. So I will follow the format I'm sure you're all very familiar with, starting with project background, going into the rules, and then end with the staff recommendation. So this project is located in the Minnehaha Regional Park, down by the falls. The primary area of review is the area where the creek is between Minnehaha Parkway and Hiawatha Avenue. I'll reference a weir later on, the Hiawatha Weir, which is just upstream of Hiawatha Avenue. You can see there. So some managers may be familiar with a previous iteration of this project. In 2015, Met Council proposed construction of a new tunnel to replace a large sanitary tunnel that's constructed in the bedrock. At that time, the new tunnel was proposed in the bedrock, as well as a new regulator vault. In order to do that, there was a significant amount of aquifer dewatering proposed. At that time, the board heard a presentation by Met Council as well as their consultants, and then heard concerns from surrounding residents about potential temporary impacts to Coldwater Spring. And the project was since was postponed by Met Council and has since been redesigned. So the applicant has now come back with a substantially different method of dealing with the soon-to-be failing infrastructure, and are now proposing to rehabilitate the tunnel by installing a custom-made fiberglass liner in the pipe. So the pipe will be taken offline and will be scanned, and then those scans will be used to essentially 3D print a fiberglass liner in 4-foot by 6-foot pieces that will then be installed in the tunnel. Under the new proposed plan, the only disturbance proposed in the bedrock is for 2 vent shafts, which are proposed for workers to breathe, and the existing access shafts will be used. And those ventilation shafts are proposed in locations where the applicant has performed test drills to ensure that they aren't in areas exhibiting fractured flow. And the process by which they're drilled will involve sealing it as the drilling occurs to prevent water from flowing into the shaft and prevent the need for any immediate or ongoing dewatering. Most of the permitting requirements actually come down to the temporary conveyance system, which will be used to reroute the sanitary sewage during the construction. 2 kind of sticking points on that are a temporary bridge that's going to be constructed just east of Hiawatha, as well as pipes that will be located underneath the Minnehaha Parkway Bridge. And the temporary conveyance in those areas is proposed to last for 18 months. The applicant did perform a wetland delineation, which was approved in November, and it was determined based on that no wetland impacts, temporary or permanent, are proposed. The applicant doesn't actually own the property; it's in utility easement, whereas the property itself is actually owned by the Minneapolis Park Board. And because of the limited scope of the property rights, no wetland buffers are required. So jumping into the rules, the first rule is the erosion control rule, and the applicant has submitted an erosion control plan including all appropriate perimeter control and construction exits, as well as a final stabilization plan that includes appropriate seed mixes for the different areas of disturbance. And so upon satisfaction of the conditions to submit NPDES documentation and identification of a contractor, the applicant will meet the rule. The applicant is also proposing floodplain fill for the temporary conveyance system. It's going to be a total of 5.2 cubic yards of floodplain fill. Most of that will be under the Minnehaha Parkway Bridge. A rendering of what the conveyance in that area would look like is shown on the screen. And so that would be for risers underneath the pipes to lift them out of the floodplain, so to prevent against any sanitary discharge that could occur during a 100-year flood. A smaller portion of that fill is proposed at the location of the temporary bridge for the abutments. And the applicant will be creating 5.3 cubic yards of floodplain storage kind of across the creek from the temporary conveyance, and therefore is meeting the compensatory storage requirement of the rule. Additionally, since this is a water course, the applicant needs to demonstrate that there will be no increase in the 100-year flood elevation. In this case, the applicant is proposing to fill less than 1% of the cross-sectional area of the channel, and that impact is small enough where it's not, it's beyond the sensitivity of the models, and therefore there won't be any rise in the floodplain, at least perceptible by any of the models. Final rule is the water body crossings and structures rule. So the water body crossing proposed is this temporary bridge on the west side of Hiawatha. It's kind of in between the Hiawatha Weir and on the light rail tracks that are there. In order to satisfy the rule, the first requirement is demonstration of a public benefit. As a public utility project, this is serving the needs of people that are served by the sanitary sewage system. And the existing tunnel is about 80 years old and is certainly in need of some sort of repair or replacement. And this will extend the life of the tunnel by 100 years. They also need to demonstrate minimal impact. The applicant submitted analysis both of the minimal impact of the lining process, which results in the temporary conveyance. The alternatives to that are either a no-build scenario in which the tunnel would eventually fail, or construction of a new tunnel which was abandoned previously due to the potential impact to Camp Coldwater Springs. As to the location of the temporary bridge that's necessitated by the conveyance system, the applicant explored some alternative options. The first, which was the preferred option, was to use the existing abandoned rail bridge, which is on the other side of Hiawatha. The owners of the bridge were not amenable to that, and therefore the applicant was unable to utilize that option. They also explored utilizing the area where the rail tracks are, but there wasn't a way to do that without causing significant disruptions to the transit service. They've minimized impact by constructing the abutments on existing walls on the creek in that area, and so there won't be disturbance there won't be a permanent structure in the natural areas there. So based on the alternatives analysis, staff believes that the minimal impact criteria has been met. Typically, we only are looking at sanitary redundancy when people are putting sanitary pipes under water courses, but in this case, there is one proposed on top of water course. And so the applicant is required to demonstrate that they've incorporated measures to prevent a sanitary discharge in case of a failure. The applicant has proposed a 3-pipe system in which one of the pipes will convey the typical flow. The second pipe would be for the highest flow event, and then the third pipe is solely used in case of a failure of one of the first 2 pipes. Additionally, the applicant is proposing to have 24-hour security to ensure that both there won't be vandalism of the pipes resulting in a failure, and that if there is any failure of the pipes, that it's detected and responded to as quickly as possible. The next criteria is the requirement to maintain navigational capacity. This bridge is proposed right downstream of the Hiawatha Weir, which is the end of the navigable portion of the creek, and therefore it will not have an impact on the navigational capacity there. Finally, the applicant needs to demonstrate retention of hydraulic capacity. This is similar analysis to what was done in the floodplain alteration section, and so the bridge abutments will be taking up about 0.2% of the cross-sectional area of the creek, which is smaller than the sensitivity of hydrologic and hydraulic models, and therefore there won't be any increase in the flood stage capacity either up or downstream from the proposed crossing. So staff believe that the applicant has met the criteria of the Water Body Crossings and Structures Rule. So staff, as the applicant has met all of the applicable rules, staff recommends approval subject to the conditions listed on the screen, and I am happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the permit with the conditions? Thank you, Manager Miller. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Manager Rognus. Are there questions or comments?
That was Becker.
I apologize. Manager Becker. Any questions or comments? Okay, thanks. A lot of work. Appreciate it, Elizabeth. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Did you have a question?
I just want to know where the Coldwater Springs folks were coming, express their gratitude for the Metro Council accommodating their concerns. We're fine. Did it cost more or less to this alternative proposal?
There is a representative from Metropolitan Council here, who I'm guessing is more able to answer that.
He gave a visual answer of pointing up.
Good evening.
Hi. Tell us your name.
My name is Chad Davison. I work with Met Council. I'm principal engineer, project manager for the project. Yeah, the cost has gone up a little bit, but not substantially.
Okay. So we saved Coldwater Springs again. The, this is the old, this is the old Minneapolis St. Paul Sanitary Sewer District pipe. I mean, it's that old. So how far does it go? I mean, where does it collect from? Just the city, or does it go all the way out to?
That pipe eventually drains into what we call a siphon that goes underneath the river. And then it goes into the joint interceptor all the way down to the metro plant at
How
Big
far
Side.
back does it collect from?
Edina and
Thank God I voted for it then.
a couple other cities.
I don't have to worry about capacity issues.
Yeah.
That's all my question.
Thank you, Mr. Davidson, appreciate it. Let's move to item, the new item 11.1, or pre-1, which is the Resolution 18133. We have a printed copy of that in front of us. Mr. Fieldset.
Thank you, President White, managers. So I'm here tonight looking for authorization to provide a letter of support to Dr. Brashad McBayer at the University of Minnesota to offer district support for his research project that could directly benefit and improve the effectiveness of our carp removal efforts in the 6 Mile Creek Halls to Base watershed. Dr. Bayer is kind of the leading carp researcher at the U of M right now. He's worked with Dr. Sorensen a lot over the last 10 years. And he currently has several research projects that are ongoing to evaluate new and more efficient methods to remove adult common carp. So this project will be conducted concurrently with removal efforts we already have planned for 2018 using these beta box nets in 2 lakes. And we'd be able to leverage our LaSarda Savings funds, which are used to pay for carp removal, as in-kind towards this research project, and bring an estimated $170,000 of additional AS Research Center research funds to our project area. So over the last month or so, we've been kind of discussing opportunities to partner with Dr. Bayer. Initially, he was going to leverage a non-competitive pool of funding at MACER, and that pool of funding had no set deadline. However, it was a small scale amount of money. He informed us this week that the current scope of the study exceeds the threshold for that pot of money, and that he would now need to submit a proposal through a more competitive process to continue existing research projects at the research center. And the deadline for that proposal is tomorrow, which is why we're up here today, and again, apologize for the late notice. Dr. Bayer has requested a letter of support from the district. So we've reviewed the scope. The project is a really good fit with what we're currently doing out there, and it provide a lot of additional value to our carp removal efforts, and should really maximize the number of carp we can remove, and will really help inform future years' removal efforts as well. There's no additional funds from the district that are asked for beyond what we already have planned for 2019. We've also indicated we could provide some additional in-kind staff support, helping with electrofishing to implant some tags used for tracking. And the U of M research should be the ones receiving these funds. The district would not be receiving any funds with this. It's just be piggybacking on work that we already have planned in 2019. So with that, I can answer any questions.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 18133?
So moved.
Manager Becker I got the name right. Is there a second? Manager Miller? Any questions or comments? Sounds like a good deal. All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Thank you.
We'll move to item 11.1, which is Resolution 18126, acceptance of the 2018 classification and compensation study results and adoption of pay structure. Mr. Whisker, you're going to change seats there. Welcome, Mr. Cox.
Thank you. T.L. Cox with Springstead.
If that's going to work. All right. President White, managers, We're here following up on the December 13th Operation and Programs Committee, here Teal Cox from Springstead, to present the results of the 2018 Classification and Compensation Study, and then request authorization from the board to actually adopt the pay structure tonight. And there's a resolution in your packet 18-126 that summarizes the actions, and later on down in the agenda, we've got a discussion item 12.1 regarding implementation. So we could have a board discussion further on down the agenda regarding compensation policy, the costs to implement, and I think tonight we're going to have a discussion on the schedule and how things may or may not converge in January. So this first item is really focused on the study results and the requesting board authorization to actually accept those study results and adopt the pay structure. So with that, like we did in committee, I will step through the HR project background and just kind of ground everybody in the history, and turn it over to TL to step through the process that Springstead ran, the results, and then we'll take any questions. So at a really high level, the organization started the strategic planning process back in October 2015. We're really looking to align the vision, mission, goals, program purpose, and start to essentially eliminate silos and reorient programs to be more aligned. And that process converged in February of 2017 with the adoption of our strategic plan, really focused on capital project implementation, policy development, with our other programs playing a supporting role for those two organizational priorities. And just in advance of the adoption of that strategic plan in February of 2017, the board approved a human resources contract to analyze the organization's structure in Springstead, and that work sort of dovetailed down into August of 2017 when the board approved a new organizational chart and started looking forward about how to implement that organizational chart and restructure. So then in January at committee and board, we had discussed between staff and the board just the basic order of operations, schedule, timeline for implementing the org chart and moving through that restructure. And we'd also provided a roadmap for complementary and ongoing human resource development, of which the class and comp study is a part. And in February 8th, the responsibility for implementing that plan had transitioned to me. We authorized the contract. Subsequently in March, we had the administrative transition, and we focused for about 90 to 100 days of time on implementing the org chart, moving through and restructuring. Initially, when we had started looking at restructuring the departments, we were going to batch position descriptions and look at classifying those using the SAFE system and establishing new compensation department by department. What we ended up doing with through discussions with the board is pushing that work out, the market comp work, until June, moving through the restructure, drafting job descriptions comprehensively for the organization, then undertaking that as one whole class and comp market study rather than department by department. And we really started that work in earnest in June when we developed a salary survey, and that got pushed out to our benchmark organizations. In September, October, we started getting the preliminary market survey results back, synthesizing that information, had a series of meetings between myself, TL, leadership team, our operations manager, and then a series of meetings with myself, TL, and the board's human resource liaisons, President White, Manager Miller, Manager Loftus, to kind of step through the results of classification, the compensation structure, started looking at comp and cost to implement. And that's really what brings us here tonight. So when we started the big evaluation of the organization, some of our overarching human resource goals are really making sure that we had essentially the right people with the right skill sets in the right amount across the organization in the right place at the right time to deliver on our strategic plan. And restructuring was really just one component of that, sort of right-sizing and calibrating the organization around our priorities. Then we turn to the classification and compensation, which is really how those restructured departments, the job classification and developing the market compensation, As you know, there's more work to be done. We're working internally on making sure that we have frameworks to set extremely clear expectations for department outputs that trickle down to individual outputs and how we follow through on review and accountability. And then we'll also be working first quarter to develop departmental and individual training plans, professional development plans to accomplish these goals. So in terms of the classification and compensation goals that we set out, these are pretty familiar. I think we've covered these several times now, but as part of the scope of work with Springstead, we're really looking at developing a compensation plan that allows us to recruit, retain the talent that we want, our need to accomplish our mission and those strategic priorities, remain market competitive, reflect our unique strategic priorities as well as reflecting the market and what benchmark organizations are paying comparable positions. Making sure that we have a consistent plan that provides internal equity so that we're, by consistently evaluating jobs and pay, that we're keeping the internal equity. That we set up a system that rewards employees based on mission-driven performance and that's clear in writing, easy to articulate to the board, staff, and the public. And then being able to obviously follow the law and all the rules and make sure that we're compliant. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to TL, and I think he's going to step through district's understanding, his understanding of the district needs, their scope of work, process, results, and then we'll pause for questions.
We can get the light to turn green there.
There you go.
I did it. I'm done now, right? As James mentioned, this is a consistent message with what you received in the committee meeting. So we'll go through, hit the high points, and certainly entertain any questions you have, anything you want to dive into in more detail. So when we began the study, as James was talking, I was writing down some key dates. August of 17, a new organizational structure was approved. March of 18, the organizational restructure went into effect. Whole-scale changes, changes that impacted the district. James used the term right-sizing and calibrating around the district's strategic priorities. Those kinds of things fundamentally change an organization's talent management program. A foundational component of that, of course, is the classification and compensation system. So, we had access, obviously, to the documents that have been presented to this board. And from that, through conversations with the district, we established what we believe to be a fairly solid understanding of what you were looking for as you approached the project. So initially, a consistent objective process for looking at jobs. Market competitiveness within the identified market, and that's both public and private sector. A pay structure that reflects that new strategic alignment, that incorporates the district's competitive position to market, and then finally reinforcing the administrative guidelines that exist. And reinforcement there is a key term. This is a system that you'd used in the past. It's a system that many of your key employees are familiar with. They understand how it works, and so the reason that we're saying reinforce here, put very simply, is if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Right? You've got a system now, you've got a process now that you understand. Keep using it. So the scope, the project initiation and data collection is very much our understanding the impact of the restructure, our understanding how the organization had been realigned and calibrated around those strategic priorities, and understanding how the jobs had changed. The essential component of a study like this is, what do jobs do? Okay, because that's what enables us to analyze the jobs internally against one another, and then to accurately compare those jobs to comparable positions in the market. And so a big part of that project initiation was understanding the job description changes that James had mentioned previously. From there, we undertook two simultaneous phases. The classification system is the safe job evaluation that we'll cover in detail. While we were analyzing those jobs internally, we then went out and compared the organization to the competitive market to understand where your ranges currently are in comparison to those jobs, and then what the new ranges should look like. From there, proceeding, of course, to how do we implement, which is, again, what we're here to talk about this evening, and then provide the final report presentation. So the SAFE job evaluation is it's a proprietary system to us. It's our method of establishing internal equity. And what we mean by that is the relationship between and among jobs in a pay structure. And there are a few key components to our system and systems like ours. Okay, so first of all, it provides a quantifiable, objective way of looking at jobs to compare a planning position to a human resources position to other jobs in the pay structure. It provides a mechanism by which, and again, I'm going to go back to what James says, calibrating around your priorities. You know, in looking at the characteristics that are in our job evaluation system, just look at the final one on the slide, impact on end results. A system like this provides a means by which you can clearly articulate how jobs contribute to those strategic priorities. Okay, and one of the other items on the slide that James mentioned for the goals of your program was compliance. A system like this also enables you to demonstrate compliance with the Minnesota pay equity requirements as well. So those are three really key components. This process was based on those modified job descriptions provided by the district, and so those job descriptions were provided to Springstead. District staff who are familiar with our SAFE process provided recommended ratings within the system, and then we undertook really an iterative process to look through, discuss, and basically independently verify and validate the job evaluation ratings that were being recommended by the district. The survey respondents are on the screen. The organizations themselves are fundamentally a policy decision, right? Who do you as a governing body want to compete with? What's your desired competitive position within that market? But certainly from our perspective, it represents a good combination of different types of organizations. You know, some private sector information. We show that as an individual line item. We don't identify individual private sector employers. We augment data we collect via the custom survey with a reputable, published source of private sector information, and so that was used in the analysis as well. The process for analyzing the salary survey data, the first bullet point is critical. We don't just match title to title. So as James mentioned, the market survey was initiated in June. Between then and the September-October timeframe, one of the things we were doing is working diligently to make sure that we have a good, solid apples-to-apples comparison. So we look at the content of jobs, the functions of jobs, the minimum qualifications of jobs, and that's really what enables us to make sure we're doing an accurate comparison. We do have stringent tests for statistical validity, and we calculate weighted averages to make sure organizations of all size have the opportunity to move that needle in terms of those comparisons. The test for statistical validity, just as an example, we require a minimum of 3 matches to make sure that we've got a trend. Okay, so after all of that analysis was done, we matched 19 of 23 jobs. So, you know, roughly 83% of your job titles, we had a minimum of 3 matches for. To be able to draw defensible conclusions, we really only needed 25 to 30% of those titles. So we had substantially more data than was necessary. So we had a lot of good information to base our recommendations on. And we had roughly 5 matches per job. And really that number's a little higher when you think about individual private sector matches, since we were just including that one line item. We also wanted to look at how different organizations designed their pay plans, and that's what that third bullet point represents. The distance from minimum to maximum is the spread for a particular range, and as you'll see in the findings a little later on, there were differences between the distance from minimum to maximum in the market and what the district has today. You know, that very well could be a reflection of just how jobs have changed in the market since 2013, 2014, when you did the prior analysis. And then, of course, we looked at, okay, we've analyzed these jobs using this SAFE system. We've created a hierarchy. We've created an alignment. Does the market then substantiate that alignment. You know, if we've placed a job in a grade, does market agree that that's really where it belongs? So the findings, the relationships of jobs, it didn't necessarily reflect how you've calibrated positions around those strategic priorities. It's not suggesting you've done anything wrong. Okay, this is critical. The fact is you've gone through whole-scale change. Okay, you've gone through an organizational restructuring. You've got a new strategic plan. You've got a new alignment, new strategic priorities. And so the structure, the hierarchy, the relationship, the internal equity that I alluded to was not reflective of those changes. Okay, and that's part of what prompted the study. So that should not be surprising to you. The market competitiveness did vary by position, but your ranges were on average below market. Certainly part of that can be explained by the fact that the comparison we were doing was against the ranges that were implemented in 2014, right? So there's been market movement over the years, and so that would explain certainly part of how you lag the market. I think the other just obvious explanation is the fact that you've changed jobs significantly. So the matches in many cases to the market that we're using this time were very different than they were last time because the jobs were different. And then finally, the average market spread, so that distance from minimum to maximum that I alluded to earlier, was different than the district's current structure. So your current range spread was 50%, and the spread in the market was 40%. So, when we get to kind of the corrective actions, we'll talk about how now the distance from your proposed minimum to proposed maximum is more consistent with what the market averages were. So then the corrective actions that we've identified for the district is we did realign your jobs. Using that safe job evaluation system, we went through and analyzed positions, analyzed job descriptions, and redefined, if you will, the internal equity that exists among positions. We've got one note here that the grade placement was really just based on kind of the district's perspective. It's not an alarming note. Fundamentally, there's just a couple of areas where, to select jobs that the placement was not necessarily what you would see in the market, but what it really represents is certainly you coalescing around and calibrating around the strategic priorities that James alluded to earlier. We did create market competitive pay structures, so the structures that we discussed at the committee meeting and that you're being asked to take action on this evening are market competitive, meaning the ranges themselves have been created around the averages for similar ranges in the market. And then we did create, again, a range spread of 40% to be more consistent with what you see in the external organizations. Okay. So you've seen this before, the classification plan. This shows the groupings that were created as a result of that job evaluation process. And then subsequently you see then the proposed minimum, midpoint, and maximum values that were created using an at-market competitive position. So then the final recommendations certainly adopt the new structures, which in effect you're confirming that at-market philosophy. We believe it does provide more competitive pay ranges for your newly defined roles and how you've realigned the organization. It puts you in a position where when it becomes necessary to recruit folks, and it does balance those articulated goals of internal equity and market competitiveness. And what we're saying, and again, the following, we've discussed this already, is maintain what you're doing. It became evident to us when we were discussing those SAFE scores that the district, as a result of that 2014 process, you understand the SAFE system, you understand the compensable factors within that system. So continue to use it because it provides an objective framework to determine where a job belongs in the pay structure. On an ongoing basis, look at how the market changes, conduct periodic reviews of positions to make sure that the SAFE scores still reflect what the employees on those jobs are doing. And we believe it'll provide you a means to administer consistently, objectively, a system that provides a competitive wage. Okay.
So we can pause here for questions. The resolution that's in your packet, 18-126, again, is looking for the board to accept the study findings, which is the market data for both the benefits, salary, and then adopt the pay structure that's included as attachment A that we've stepped through at committee, was included in the presentation in the packet.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 8126? Manager Miller, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Becker, are there questions or comments? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Resolution 18127, Ms. Reynolds.
President White, managers, let's see if the presentation's going to come up. There we go. Tonight, we are looking at the adoption of the internal controls for the district for our financial management processes and procedures. The internal controls, as we've discussed them in the past, they're the procedures we use to ensure the integrity of the district's financial management and our processes that we utilize. They promote the accountability of our system and help to prevent fraud. The auditors do review and test the internal controls, and they utilize those internal controls to help establish what they're doing within their audit and what they are going to select for their testing as they do their audit process. The internal controls were addressed by the board and approved back in April of 2008. And since in the last 10 years, the district's processes have evolved over time. And what we have in front of you today is the proposed internal controls that reflecting really our current processes that the district are utilizing. So what we're just looking to do is update from 2008 to a 2018 internal controls reflecting our current processes. There's the one change that would be in it is payroll, which will reflect the processes as we would utilize with the new third-party vendor that was approved at last week's meeting. So those processes are updated to reflect how things will flow with that. The proposed controls were passed to our district auditor and asked them to review them and to see if they had any recommendations for improvements. They provided a couple which have been incorporated into the controls that you have in front of you. And their statement on those proposed controls are adequate to meet audit requirements. I will take any questions. I do have and can go through a more detailed comparison if the board would like to see that, but I don't want to drag you through that if you're comfortable with where they are at this point.
I just want to comment, Administrator, anytime you bring changes like this to the board, couldn't we have a red line showing what's proposed? And number two, do we have a letter from the auditor stating that he approves this, any and all changes that are recommended?
Manager Miller, managers, we can certainly make sure that that's practice to include red lines when we're bringing forward changes in policy, whether it's internal controls or anything else. And as far as a letter from the auditor, I know Kathy coordinated with the auditor and got an opinion. I don't know if you formalized that in a letter or not.
Manager Miller, just from Mr. We did not ask them to formalize it in a letter. I did send it to them, and they replied back to me via email in regards to it, and I have their email comments in regards to the...
Okay, if you could forward that, at least to me, that'd be great.
I can do that.
Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 18127?
So moved.
Manager Becker, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Loftus. Any further questions or comments? Manager Loftus.
Kathy, there's a comment that additional steps could be implemented, or that was a comment from our external consultants. Was there anything useful beyond hire more staff? I know that's the
typical one that a small organization can't get behind or can't do anything about. Were there any other additional steps for improvement that we should be considering, or was hire more staff the only comment?
Manager Loftus, the recommendation is there were places where we could add additional separations of duties, and, you know, in the internal controls are, take it to this stage here, our invoice processing, the accountant, we have the single accountant that's doing the input of the data, the printing the checks, preparing, and doing that, and doing the bank account reconciliation. So it is a one person, so there are no separations in that point. So there are recommendations, you know, additional separations in that point could be implemented that would further, you know, increase the controls and further increase the protections offered by our internal controls. So that would be one of them. That is some recommendations. Taking that in mind.
Is that achievable with our current setup?
I believe, yes, it is. With our current operation setups, we could do that by moving certain pieces of that internal to the organization. It's one of those items that I've kind of have talked about, but at this point in time, we're just bringing this forward, addressing our current status without taking those additional steps.
Okay.
We did add, and I kind of am flipping through a few of these slides, and I'm sorry, the bank reconciliation. Right now, our controls kind of end at the bank reconciliation, and that's usually kind of the final step a little bit in your control factors. I have added onto there now to kind of, since we don't have the earlier separations and it's all being done by the accountant, that I'm doing a positive verification of that reconciliation and pulling bank accounts separately and going in and doing a detailed review of her reconciliations every month to kind of add a layer on the back side of it.
Great.
Any other questions or comments? Andrew Miller.
We eliminated the 325 checking account. Have we got a notice from the bank that that's been closed out?
Yes, Manager Miller, that was approved at the first meeting in November, and the bank closed those accounts, I believe, on November 19th. Those funds have been rolled into the general fund, and then with our recommendations for fund closures at the end of the year, we will be coming forward with all of that for the transfers. Past that initial resolution, moved it into our cold storage fund. And then we'll be closing those and bringing forward those recommendations with year end.
My question was, do we have a notice from the bank that the account has been closed?
I have the final bank statements from them.
Okay. And it's closed?
Yes, they are closed.
Thank you. Anything else? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Ms. Reynolds. Resolution 18128, Ms. Clark.
Good evening, Chair White, Board of Managers. I've got 2 local water management plans requested for approval tonight. Before I get into those requests for board action, just to give a brief reflection on the information item regarding local water management plan approval and plan status that was provided in your packet. Some key points there. The staff level coordination between the Met Council and Watershed District staff is ongoing, and I think the coordination of the process is good. Generally, the process itself works where communities submit their local plan to the district and Met Council at the same time. The district has 60 days to complete their review. Met Council has 45 days within that, so then we can reflect their comments and our comments back to communities. And then there's a bit of iteration before a plan comes before the board for approval. The LGUs across the district are generally very responsive, even those we haven't received plans from yet. We've been in communication with, and actually those LGUs have requested the 6-month extension to their comp plan that Met Council has offered. The Met Council has indicated themselves that they intend to circle back with Bowser and watershed districts to glean lessons learned from this local water plan and comp plan review process to improve things for next time. And kind of I guess it shouldn't be a shocker, but as of a week ago, out of 100 and some plans they are required to receive by December 31st, they had 11.
Oh, my.
And 2 of those were in the watershed districts, both with local water management plans approved. Now, as of during this week, they're starting to come in, and my staff person at Met Council has been asking what the status is of those local plans, and indicated a cooperation there as they review and approve comprehensive plans. So I guess there is room for further specificity and rules, I guess at least according to Met Council's official position, but at a staff level, I think there's good coordination. And across our communities, I believe there's good cooperation, and we will have some good completed plans, I think, fully done, hopefully by June. The summary table was in your packet of those. With the board action requested tonight, we'll have 10 approved in 2018. Another 8 likely coming before you in January. And then, looking ahead at the status of the remainder of the plans, we think by June we should have them all completed. With each of these requests for board actions, I do highlight the watershed district's goals for its 2018 comprehensive plan. And overall, the way the local water management plan review and approval process fits into these goals are twofold. One, the legal framework provided in the various statutes and through our plan. And then 2, the local water management plans are a key implementation strategy for these goals identified in our plan, namely the coordination plans, which are intended to position the district as a partner and promote that early coordination of land use and water planning, which is a key strategy of our plan. We've got the City of Minnetonka and City of Plymouth local water plans for your review and request for action tonight. I'll start with the City of Minnetonka. I would also like to note that Will Manchester, the City of Minnetonka Director of Engineering, is in the audience tonight as well.
Welcome.
I will provide a watershed orientation of the city, provide a local water management plan kind of summary, and areas of coordination that were identified. First, the City of Minnetonka is located the headwaters of Minnehaha Creek and largely within the Minnehaha Creek subwatershed, which is an area of focus for the district. The City of Minnetonka overall is 28 square miles with 13 square miles within the watershed district. It includes 4 watershed management organizations. In total, you'll see Bassett Creek, 9 Mile Creek, and Riley Purgatory Creek are also partially located within Minnetonka. Again, the city is primarily within the Minnehaha Creek subwatershed. That red vertical line by the title Minnetonka approximates the city boundary in the Minnehaha Creek subwatershed. The issues noted there within the subwatershed: excess nutrients, disrupted creek hydrology, degraded ecological health, largely caused by increased stormwater runoff and an altered creek channel as a result of urbanization. Minnetonka has mitigated a lot of these effects within this portion of the subwatershed through their proactive land use planning and preservation of the creek corridor within the city. Management strategies for the watershed district focus on improving stormwater management, treatment, and the creek corridor as a whole. In the city of Minnetonka, they've divided the city into 17 smaller subwatersheds or drainage districts and identified localized priorities within each of those. The coordination plan with the city of Minnetonka highlights educational opportunities and workshops that we cooperate on. They have brought up some interesting future collaboration opportunities, potentially with their public works yard, and also noted considering in the future how Minnetonka, the district, and Hopkins might coordinate on repurposing the Hopkins yard at the corner of Hopkins Crossroads on Minnehaha Creek, which is a compost site located on the creek. So I think those areas of future coordination, in addition to continuing their land acquisition and preservation of the creek corridor as opportunities arise, are the kind of key coordination efforts that the city of Minnetonka has identified. The city of Minnetonka implements some rules within the watershed district, floodplain alteration, stormwater management, and erosion control. And it concurs the district will continue to implement wetland protection and other rules with, besides those under district control. And the city will continue to retain local government unit status for the Wetland Conservation Act. So with that, staff recommendation is approval of the City of Minnetonka Local Water Management Plan.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 18128?
So moved.
Manager Miller, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Loftus, any questions for Ms. Clark? Earlier in the evening, Manager Miller commented that visuals are important. I love the map showing all the city-owned land along the creek. That was really, to hear it and see it are different things. That's really remarkable.
Good, thank you.
Yeah. I haven't taken a vote, have I?
No.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank Mr. Manchester for being here as well and his cooperation with me on their plan.
Thank you, Mr. Manchester. All right, 18129.
Moving into the City of Plymouth Local Water Management Plan, again, I'll provide a watershed orientation, a summary of the plan and areas of coordination. First, the City of Plymouth is located north of Minnetonka, also bordered by Medina, Orono, and Wayzata in the upper western portion of the district. Plymouth also includes 4 watershed management organizations. The city is 36 square miles, of which 5.8 square miles are within the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District. Minnehaha Creek is in the northwest corner in gray. This accounts for about 3% of the total watershed district. The majority of the city of Plymouth is within the Gleason Lake subwatershed, with about 0.3 square miles in the Minnehaha Creek subwatershed, and that red arrow on the bottom of the map indicates that small lobe of the city within the watershed district that actually drains through Minnetonka to the Minnehaha Creek subwatershed. My review will focus on the water resources within the Gleason Lake subwatershed. This is the subwatershed map for Gleason Lake. There are 4 impaired lakes within the Gleason Lake subwatershed and at least partially located within the city of Plymouth. Mooney, and then which drains to Hadley to the north, and that water gets to Hadley via the pumping plan and the emergency overflow infrastructure that the district and city partnered on. And then there's Kretz Lake, which discharges to Gleason Lake, both of those impaired as well. The issues within the subwatershed, again, are excess nutrients, some localized flooding, disconnected corridors as a result of urbanization, and then the contribution of upstream water bodies to downstream impaired waters, causing those issues. Strategies largely are wetland restoration, stormwater management, and then implementing those in an integrated way with the City of Plymouth's CIP.
Can I ask a question? We've had several big projects on Gleason Lake, and it's still impaired. What would it take to, or is it just not possible to remove it from the impaired body?
Manager Miller's managers, that's a good question, and I can't answer that. The loading is a combination of internal loading and external watershed loading, and a combination of both, focusing first on the upstream contributions, will be necessary to cause that cause those lakes to be delisted. And then moreover, the response in lakes and water bodies as a result of land use change happens over time and is on quite a longer time horizon. So to say that implementation of these 5 things would result in this benefit when isn't done. And further, in the Gleason Lake subwatershed, really we have a large-scale understanding of the science through the TMDL to really get at what projects and where to best accomplish those load reductions. Further data analysis is needed. I've put up a red line on that map, and that shows the City of Plymouth boundary within the Gleason Lake subwatershed. And then just for reference, the little red line that I just added is the boundary between Orono and Medina on Mooney Lake for orientation. The City of Plymouth's implementation priorities are largely education, regulation, street sweeping. The city has a robust street sweeping program, and we've learned that they are preparing to take that program in-house with purchase of their own equipment and some specialized functions of equipment, which will allow them to do even a better job street sweeping and then prioritize where they sweep and how often, particularly around water bodies, to reduce external loading. And that's something that Plymouth has talked about. Some areas of future coordination that Plymouth has flagged are more improvements being led by Plymouth in the Gleason Lake subwatershed. They have initiated a feasibility study looking at 4 different ponding areas. They did ask the district for input on the RFP before that study went out, and I believe they're just getting results of that study back. And then Mooney Lake continues to be an area of coordination. Our education and communications program is working closely with their lake association, as is the City of Plymouth. And long-term, I think it's the city's intention to prioritize external load management for Mooney Lake in coordination with their road CIP in the future. So those are areas of coordination that have been discussed recently and are identified in their plan. So with that, the City of Plymouth will retain local water LGU status for implementing the Wetland Conservation Act, and the district will continue to implement its regulatory rules within the city. Recommendation is for approval of the City of Plymouth's local water management plan.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 18129?
Move approval.
Manager Miller, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Becker, questions or comments? Those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Briefly, managers, the issues that Renee highlighted in her communication to the board in writing, and then she touched on briefly here, are, I would say, on our radar, and we'll be working with Bowser to address those timing concerns that have emerged in a somewhat surprising way. So,
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Ms. Clark made a presentation and explained that many of the city plans are, the comprehensive plans are being subject to delays. The rules for the water plans do not allow the water plans to be similarly delayed, but Met Council is not necessarily requiring completion of the water plans at the same time. So we'll be communicating with them in that regard, as are Renee, and I think Becky's involved as well.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Resolution 18130, Ms. Cermak.
Thank you.
President White, Board of Managers, I'm here tonight to request authorization to purchase confined space entry equipment. I'm going to briefly walk through research and monitoring's program priorities and how stormwater monitoring really supports those goals. I'll explain what confined space entry actually entails and why it goes hand in hand with stormwater monitoring, and I'll wrap up with the benefits we'll see by bringing these capabilities in-house. So we continue to collect routine samples district-wide in each sub-watershed to inform long-term change. But we really are pushing for our data to better support projects through project identification and communicating about the success of our projects. And when we think about effectiveness monitoring, we have a suite of metrics we can use to communicate that, depending on the project goals. But you'll tend to see stormwater used quite frequently. One, because we tend to address stormwater through our capital projects, and two, it's a really nice metric for communicating because we see those results immediately. However, stormwater monitoring comes with unique challenges. Storms are unpredictable, they're extremely flashy, so getting the information we need requires specialized equipment. We've been investing in that the past couple years. We now have 5 of those setups out in the field. This map highlights where those 5 stations are. And I want to point out that these sites are not just randomly, dispersed across Minnehaha Creek. These are aligned with projects and future locations that we've identified as potential for a great project. And this is kind of just a cool image of what it actually looks like inside the pipe. You'll see the sensor there installed on that metal ring. And so currently, when we realize that one of our sensors is failing, we're not allowed to get in here. You need specialized training and specialized equipment. So we've only been able to react to equipment failure. Then we schedule with a consultant, and 1 to 2 weeks later, we finally get someone in the pipe, get the problem fixed. So that results in an expenditure along with some loss of data. So we really would like to bring those capabilities in-house so we can prevent that failure from happening by doing routine maintenance. And if a failure does happen, we can be more responsive about it and get in there immediately. So confined space entry is made up of kind of 3 main components, all in the realm of safety. Training is required. Staff was able to join in with City of Minneapolis a month ago, and we'll plan on keeping up with that annually. This picture shows MWMO graciously coming out and helping us remove our Arden equipment. Before demo began, we were cutting it pretty close out there. And, we're capitalizing on our relationship with them because they're experts in confined space. Majority of their sampling sites do require it. So they were more than happy to share their knowledge, their safety protocols, and their entry forms. So really the final piece that we need is just the hardware. So the equipment asked tonight is outlined in this table here. The first thing is the air meter. We put that in the manhole, and that just tells us, is the air safe to breathe? The entrant would put on a harness which gets hooked up to the tripod, which we can use to lower staff into the manhole and can perform emergency rescue if necessary. So by bringing this in-house, we're of course seeing a consultant cost eliminated. Just as an example, Research and Monitoring spent $7,500 on this in 2018, so more than the cost of the equipment. And other programs as well require confined space. So just as an example, when permitting has a closeout inspection, sometimes a confined space entry is required, and now we'll have those capabilities to do that for them. But the cost savings is a nice thing. The main reason we really want to bring this in-house is for the routine maintenance. The district has made a big investment with the stormwater equipment. We want to be able to maximize the benefit from that and increase the longevity. So with that, I'm recommending the authorization to purchase the confined space entry equipment.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 18130?
Approval.
Manager Miller, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Loftus, any questions or comments? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The manager's staff have coordinated on insurance with regard to this equipment as well. IEP form.
Okay. Resolution 18131, approving the CAC bylaws. Mr. Lochner.
Good evening, President White, Board of Managers. The first item I have before you tonight is approval of the Citizen Advisory Committee bylaws. Before I go into the content of some of the changes that were made with the updates, I wanted to share with you an email I received from District Council Welch, and basically informed us of some correspondence that happened in December of 2014 from Council Chuck Holtman. Basically, in that correspondence, it stated that the Board of Managers does not need to give formal approval to the CAC bylaws, but can provide general approval for those as they're written. So I can go through the updates that were made in October of this year, and then the board can make their decision from there in terms of how you want to approve or authorize the bylaws as written. So basically the bylaws are the guide to the functions and operations of the Citizen Advisory Committee. And the changes that were made in October of this year were basically real high level changes. The Citizen Advisory Committee previously had in their bylaws officer positions of president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer. Now they operate in an executive team format, in a chair, vice chair, and then 2 executive team members. What's really important about that executive team is they form as a liaison to staff and the Board of Managers and provide a direct line of communication between all those bodies. The remainder of the significant changes with the bylaws were mainly made so the bylaws were easier to read and understand. We deleted items that were no longer relevant, and basically just to reduce the overall text of the bylaws. So there wasn't any significant text or substance changes, but the last time they were updated was December of 2014. So the CAC wanted to provide some updates and wanted to provide the board an opportunity to review those changes. So with that, I'd welcome any comments or questions from the Board of Managers.
Mr. Welch.
Madam Chair and Managers, I recommend that the managers accept the CAC bylaws. They've already been adopted by the CAC and they're within their approval, so board approval is not.
Move that we accept the bylaws.
Second.
Any questions? Thank you, Mr. Lochner. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
This too would be helpful if we saw the red line.
I agree.
That would-
I agree. Also, Mr. Lochner has Resolution 18132.
The second item that I have before you, President White, Board of Managers, is the approval of the 2019 Citizen Advisory Committee appointments. Each year, the Board of Managers appoints Citizen Advisory Committee members for the upcoming calendar year. By statute, the district is obligated annually to appoint members to the CAC. As you might be aware, during the 2018 calendar year, the CAC was involved with really some detailed discussions regarding the district's strategic priorities. And as looking at the current membership, it was thought that we would stay with the existing members rather than seeking new applicants, just due to the nature of the work that we'll be looking at during the upcoming calendar year. We wanted to make sure that we had a strong base for the Citizen Advisory Committee. To just give you a little background, in 2018, we started with 16 members. During the calendar year, 2 individuals resigned. And then when I did a formal poll of the individuals to see who wanted to continue in 2019, only 1 individual decided to step off, which would leave us with 13 members going into 2019. And that's in the resolution. You'll see the 13 individuals that have expressed interest in continuing serving on the Citizen Advisory Committee this upcoming year. And so what I'm asking is for the board to approve that slate of committee members for 2019.
Is there a motion to approve appointment of the 2019 Citizen Advisory Committee members? Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Becker. Letters of thanks are going out to the current members of the CAC this week, recognizing their year of good work for us. No comments or questions? Those are, yeah, Mr.
And just as
Walker.
a side note, the Citizen Advisory Committee would really like to thank staff and board for helping them just to be more engaged and involved with the matters of the district. And their level of satisfaction has really increased. And right now I'm working with getting their input through a survey, and I'll have those results back to you in early part of 2019. And so we kind of get a sense of what their thoughts are, what their experience was, and how we can also improve on working with them.
Great, thank you. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you very much. And the assignments for liaisons to the advisory committee were printed out by Mr. Lockman, was sitting in front of us. We're on to board discussion, item 12.1, implementation of the class and comp study. Mr. Whisker.
Thank you, President White, managers. There we go. All right, well, first, I wanted to start out, we're going to be talking about some of the next steps with regards to what this organization is going to do to implement the classification and compensation results and its pay structure. And I wanted to take a moment and just thank the Board of Managers and staff and Springstead and TL for his help in stepping in and playing a leadership role, and the board liaisons to just be able to get to this point. Point where the board felt comfortable actually approving the pay structure tonight. It's been a lot of work, and it's obviously been a long road with the human resource work that we really started in end of 16 through 17 into 18 with the restructure, and very happy that the board felt comfortable enough to accept that tonight. Now we want to move into discussing how we're going to move forward and implement those results as an organization as sort of a total compensation package. So you'll appreciate as we go through this that this is for discussion tonight and all new territory for me, and I appreciate all the help I've been getting along the way, and I expect to get a little bit more from the board this evening. With regards to the discussion and what we're focusing on, I want to cover draft compensation policy, and I'll step through that sort of section by section. I assume and hope that the board's read that. It's in draft form. It's hopefully pending comment tonight would be considered for final action at the January 10th meeting, and then I'll pause for comments after walking through that to see if there's any comments on the policy, and Really, the purpose of that is to provide the organization a level of written clarity on what we pay and how we pay and why we're paying the way that we are. And that's something that from 2014 or even before 2014, we haven't had a level of clarity in writing that sort of links the board's involvement in that pay structure, how the administrator's implementing that, and provided clear framework for staff to know how they may move through our pay ranges. After we cover that, I think what I'll do is I'm going to combine the last two elements of conversation here, the cost to implement and next steps and schedule, and reflect on some of the conversations I've been having today, and really just look for the board for guidance on how you want to move forward, looking for January 10th as sort of the next meeting, whether we're regrouping in committee or bringing things forward at the board meeting or stretching things out a little bit further. So that's kind of the docket. With regards to the compensation policy, like I mentioned, I'm going to step through this by section here. And the first portion of this is really just sort of a broad philosophical statement. We've woven in our vision and some of our guiding principles, and just outlined that the Watershed District's trying to be an elite organization. We understand and acknowledge that our people are one of our most important assets in accomplishing our big, important goals, and therefore to attract and retain the people that we need to accomplish those objectives, we're committed to some compensation goals, a compensation plan that remains competitive with the public and private market within our region, and also, as we talked about earlier on in the night, reflects our unique strategic priorities and our particular standards of excellence. And also talks about that we view compensation as a total package of both salary and employee benefits. So there's sort of a prelude or an intro in there that's sort of an overarching statement of philosophy. And then woven in there as well, you'll see the goals from the comp and class study. And so these are outlined in the policy as essentially the objectives that this policy's intended or designed to achieve. And I'm not going to step through those because we've covered them about 4 or 5 times in the last 2 weeks. Next up is how the plan is administered, and really speaking to the division of authority. So first it defines the plan, just in very basic terms, that we've got systematically classified jobs or positions, corresponding salary ranges, and then the pay structure that you've approved would be appended as attachment A. And then as you go through and maintain that, it becomes a living document attached to the policy, and that's really the pay plan that we're administering. In terms of how that happens, I've tried to speak broadly to the board's authority, and I think there's a tie to governance policies with some of the things in this policy, and as you know from our retreat earlier this year, that's an effort that we've yet to undertake. So there'll be some definition that's forthcoming in the governance policies that clearly spells out the specific authorities. But this policy speaks to the fact that the board approves the plan, which you did this evening, that the board approves any rebaselining of the plan against the market. So if we're going to go out and do a market compensation study, you'd A, likely be approving the contract to go do that work, and B, when that plan comes back, you're approving that plan again. So you have control there over setting the plan. And then any significant adjustments to the plan to meet organizational needs. If we're reclassifying jobs, creating new jobs, realigning, those sorts of things, there's some level of board approval over that. I think that that's where there's probably, and this is the last section in here that I'll get to, there's a tie to governance policies. We haven't defined those levels of involvement. The governance policy has, as we've discussed through the retreat, has some sections that are seemingly in conflict with each other and the direction that we generally want to go. So the way that this is drafted right now just hews to the board has control over all the elements until we get that final level of clarity defined in governance policy, and then these two will talk to each other. As far as the administrator's responsibility for the plan is really to implement it as approved and directed by the board, and that's the purpose of the policy. We want the administrator to be implementing the pay plan consistent with both the governance policies that you set as well as this policy, which provides guidance on range penetration and reviews and how people move and those sorts of things. So that's plan administration. The next section just talks about maintaining the plan. And this is something that we, A, didn't do in the past, and B, didn't have written policy on how we would do it. So I'm going to take a moment to just step through this. Really, the point of this section is to just identify that we've set the midpoint of the salary ranges competitively based on the midpoint of comparable positions in the market, and that on an annual basis, those ranges would be reviewed and updated as part of the budget. And that the board must approve any of those annual updates that are recommended by staff. And the way that we would apply movement to the ranges in the pay plan itself is using the Bureau of Labor Statistics Employment Cost Index. And there's a number of different indices we could use. This is one that, in coordination with Kathy, we're recommending for now. We can take feedback on. Keep working with TL on it. But that's the index that's set, and that's published quarterly and breaks down labor costs for public and private, but we'd be drawing from sort of the public sector jobs. And then that index from June to June we'd use and apply that to the minimum, the mid, and the max. And then through the budget process, because we'd be going June to June, we'd be able to recommend, here's how the ranges shift. And then that would become part of the budget approval process, a formal part of the budget approval process. And then there's language in there that talks also about that periodically, as needed, but no less than every 5 years, we would look to the board to authorize us to re-baseline and go out and actually do market analysis. So, take a moment there, and feel free to jump in if there's questions. I'm just kind of stepping through this linear, or we can hold them to the end as well.
All these policies, are they going to be memorialized in a resolution?
Well, if you, in January, yes, based on the feedback you provide and further refinement, this would come back and you would adopt this policy by resolution, and this would guide actually how we're implementing the pay structure. And then as we discussed through the governance policy discussion, all of our operational or programmatic or governance policies, the governance policies defining board, administrator interaction and authorities, the policies governing our finance, governing how we implement HR, governing how we buy land or plan projects. I think there's going to be a comprehensive effort to put those into a book and actually be able to reference those by program, so you can see them all in one place. And I'm not sure if that's what you were asking too, but I know that's come up in the past.
Yeah, it's kind of a mystery before.
Sure.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
The last point you made about doing a formal study, no less frequent than every 5 years. Could we give ourselves more flexibility on that and just say conducted as needed, which
Yeah.
is what you have,
Mm-hmm.
and you could say but recommended every 5 years?
Sure.
Because I think if we're doing a good job keeping up, adjusting our range, I don't think 6 or 8 years is
Right.
completely unreasonable, and I just don't want to. I don't know that it's
Right.
something to hold ourselves to that strictly.
Sure. Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think where we started was just as needed, and I looked at it and I said, well, who decides when we need it? What are the measures? And I didn't want to get too rigid in like sort of metrics, like what are the
Yeah.
triggers for requiring another study? We've got a different board, different staff. I didn't want that to be some insurmountable obstacle to actually go out and do a market study. But I think that makes sense, as needed, but recommended every 5 years.
Or within every 5 years?
Well, that's kind of how it's written,
Yeah.
which is, I think, then becomes a requirement rather than a recommendation, a guideline. Any other comments on that? Okay. So the next section's new hire placement, which is fairly straightforward, I think. starting salaries for new employees, and as you know, we're actively interviewing for GIS positions, so this applies to those sorts of things. That starting salary be set within range, and it would be based on how many years of experience, what knowledge and skill and proficiency they're demonstrating and coming in with. Administrators approving starting salaries, and then we've built in 90 and 180-day reviews required, which isn't really a compensation requirement, but we've woven it in anyway, since we don't have that as a sort of a broad policy anywhere else. And also, it then creates a trigger that if you brought somebody in at the end of second quarter and then you hit December, you might not be looking to provide them a performance adjustment, or if they came in at third quarter, you might not be looking to give them a performance adjustment after only being here 90 days. And so allowing a performance adjustment after 180 days, make sure that somebody doesn't have to wait 18 months, so you can make some incremental adjustment. And we've had that, when people are joining us in November or October, you're not going to adjust their salary in January. So those are the basics of the new hire language. It's a pretty short section.
Your 90 and 180-day reviews are what kind of reviews?
A performance evaluation?
That should be specified.
Okay. Well, so these are slides. Let's look to the language. We'll complete 90 and 180-day performance reviews of newly hired employees. Is that satisfactory? Do we need to use a different?
No, that's good.
Okay. Good with that? Okay. So then the next section is probably the meat of the policy in some ways, which is the movement through the ranges, how we envision people moving through the ranges. And this is broken down kind of into three parts here, where we've got the overall perspective on range penetration. There, we've woven in broad guidelines, guideposts for performance considerations, and then we've broken down the minimum, mid, and max into compensation ratios, which start to give. When you add all those up together, it gives you sort of a comprehensive way of looking at the pace and magnitude of movement through the range when you're looking at annual adjustments. So just kind of ticking through it, from the overall perspective, we're looking at the fact that we've set our midpoint competitively with the market's midpoint, and that our view is to be at midpoint, you need to have a level of complete proficiency, knowledge, skills, abilities, track record of performance. And so with midpoint being a target in that sense for proficient employees, we're looking as an organization to move employees from the minimum of the range to the mid of the range somewhat efficiently based on performance and a track record of consistently meeting standards. So then you would step into the next section, which I will in a second, which talks about what those performance considerations are. Movement from mid to max is more gradual, is based on performance, and here you're not just looking at are you consistently meeting the proficiency standards to perform the job, but consistently performing at a standard higher than what is required at midpoint. Which isn't unfamiliar. That's something that we talked about at the previous committee meeting. So then you get into the performance considerations, and here I think the challenge is to be both comprehensive but not exhaustive. This isn't the complete list of things, and these are guideposts that help provide policy guidance from the board to the administrator, and then we'd be transitioning these into measurable performance review processes or documents and how we step through it. That's something that we talked about at committee, is taking some of the subjectivity out of it. So in the policy, we've sort of geared towards listing the types of things that we're considering, and then turning those into the performance review into sort of measurable criteria. And these are things that we talked about at committee and got some suggestions on. Just the knowledge, skills, abilities to meet proficiency. With our performance reviews, we've looked at breaking down sort of what are the key performance indicators for an individual in the year, looking at what are the initiatives that need to be completed, as well as what strengths are people building on and what weaknesses or growth areas are they investing in, which start to guide where people are investing and where the organization is investing in professional development. So how people are hitting those key performance indicators. The track record of improvement, we're looking for a steady trajectory of continuous improvement, not a good 6 months or a year and then a bunch of issues. So continuous improvement's important. Independence, autonomy, the initiative, the proactivity, strategic or critical thinking, and then we want, highly driven critical thinkers that are identifying problems, but then also the solutions, being creative, innovative. Some of the things that we've looked at in our cultural guiding principles are just how dedicated people are, the level of engagement, how people are collaborating, teamwork, individuals' efforts towards the strategic priorities for their department or the organization. And then as we continue working at a staff level, which will be hopefully coming to a head here in January, February at the staff retreat, staff's working on finalizing their cultural document that would be brought forward to staff, to the board rather. The principles from culture that we'd be looking at, those behavioral practices, growth mindset, how transparently people are operating, positive attitude, leadership at all levels, how we're mentoring and being a learning organization. So the first section talks about range penetration and sort of pace of movement tied to performance. This section sort of starts to broadly outline the types of things that we're considering as an organization related to performance. And I'll see if there's questions there before I move on to the next section.
Doesn't look like it. Go ahead.
No? Okay. So the next section outlines compensation ratios, which is really if midpoint is something of a target for a proficient employee, the compensation ratio is a measure, a metric of range penetration relative to that midpoint. So is somebody at, below, or above midpoint? And this isn't specific policy guidance to say with these many years or this performance you belong exactly at this percent or bracket. These are broad, high-level guideposts that start to inform if we think people should be moving this quickly from the minimum to the mid based on performance criteria, then we can look at where they actually sit at the end of the year using a compensation ratio, and that starts to gauge, should somebody be getting no increase? Should somebody be getting cost of living? Or is this a year based on where they currently sit and their performance and our philosophy of movement that we're probably programming a more sizable increase for that individual? And so really all it does is it breaks down the ranges just a little bit more, but again, these aren't intended to be explicit breakpoints where with some numerical formula, with this many years experience and one good performance review, you're supposed to be at 87%. It's informing those other two sections that we would look at comprehensively to gauge magnitude and pace of movement, which gives a little bit more guidance to supervisors.
Well, I'm glad my pension is not decided at 100 to 116% proficiency.
Okay.
How do you get more than 100%?
Of midpoint.
Oh, midpoint. I
Right.
thought you were talking about
So,
performance.
right, so our minimum is set around 83% of the midpoint, and our maximum salary range is around 116% of midpoint.
Okay.
So 100%
It's not
means,
performance, it's compensation. Okay.
yeah, so, right. So 97 to 103 is that, 6% band right around midpoint, where if you've got a proficient employee with the right years of experience and a consistent track record of performance based on our first section of philosophy, we'd expect to see them around midpoint. Movement beyond that, we're looking for a continuous track record of performance that is beyond what is required to be proficient in the job, and that you would be moving people more gradually through that upper range.
Manager Loftus.
Are we skipping 104 to 110?
Yeah, I didn't get the math perfect here.
In our printed copy,
Oh,
we
I'm
have
sorry.
that. It
Let
just
me
didn't
look at
make the
that.
slide.
Okay. Thank you.
I apologize for that.
Oh, it's here. I just
Sorry,
didn't see
that
it.
was a little bit of a mistake on translating what's in the packet to the slide.
Yep, I see it. So higher level than required.
Mhm.
Got it.
Good catch.
No, she's pointed it out where it is. I didn't, should have seen that.
Just put you between 90 and 96.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Gaining experience.
Yep, not fully proficient,
So
but consistent.
this is a little tighter than the 40% of spread that the salary ranges should reflect.
I might turn to TL to answer what the range spread is and how this,
Well, the range spread is 40%. And this is less than 40%.
I'm not sure I know the answer to that question. I'm still not fully proficient.
This looks like 30. Did you want to have anything to offer, Mr. Cox?
I don't. I'll step up here. I don't know the question. This isn't a document I prepared, but yeah, the range spreads are 40%.
This is 33.
So we can tweak the numbers here a little bit, maybe?
And is it wise to use less than the available spread?
It's a difficult question to answer. I mean, fundamentally, no. I mean, if you've got a range defined, you need to use the range. I mean, so that's.
So we could do 80% and 120%.
Yes.
And
Or
take advantage.
75 and 110.
I'm not sure. I'll trust you.
Or whatever, your 40.
I just think if you have a spread, you ought to use it.
Yeah.
I hadn't even thought about that, so thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cox, appreciate it.
I'll hang out just in case, but no problem.
Makes sense, thank you. Any other thoughts on that?
Nope.
It's helpful.
Excuse me.
Okay, and the last section, we worked in some language that I toyed around with regarding position classification and reclassification. And here we're just focusing on the fact that we will establish this policy that we're using SAFE to evaluate jobs consistently, whether it's a new position or reclassification of position. And this is the one that I think has probably the strongest tie to governance policies, and we haven't discussed as a group how we're going to handle this. But generally, I think where we landed in the board retreat is that we should be on some routine basis, whether it's annually or not, taking stock of our strategic needs in the future and looking at what are our human resource needs. And the policy really just speaks to that, is that we, the administrator and the board, in accordance with the governance policies, would on some cycle, likely timed with the budget, be taking stock of what are our priorities, what are our human resource needs, to be informed by department managers, but viewed through an organizational lens. And we might, as a group, make recommendations and decide to reclassify jobs, that we need a new position, that we need to restructure. And right now, this sort of punts to when that happens, how that happens to governance policies, but says that we'll do it on some sort of cycle, we'll use SAFE to evaluate any changes, and that the board would be the one approving any of the fiscal or organizational impact associated with any changes that come out of a human resources analysis. And this isn't directly tied to compensation, but so I throw that out there. I think it's a nice tie to the governance policies, which will outline on what cycle we look at human resources, and then it just memorializes that we're using the SAFE system to actually look at jobs.
Is this going to be in a resolution form also?
Well, the whole
Oh, one
policy is in the
Okay.
packet, so you would adopt the whole thing, and these are just the sections.
Section.
Yeah. So yes. Makes sense?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I've got some good feedback. I don't know if there's any other questions I think, again, the purpose is to create a grounding level of, oh, go ahead.
One question, and I think
Mhm.
James will probably get to it later, but
Mhm.
on the first section, under compensation philosophy, the last sentence is that we consider salary and employee benefits to competitively position ourselves in the market. And we've got TL's study, and we're going midpoint and discussing through this 3-page policy how we're going to do that, but we're not addressing the benefits information or our philosophy on that. So I guess if we're going to move forward January 10th, I'd like to see a section added to this policy where we address that, whether it's number 7 or where it fits into this policy. Addressing the same sort of things, like here's the market, like you've identified here, where we want to be, and so that the board is acutely aware of what we offer and what we want to offer in the future.
Okay.
I know that we don't have benefits renewal until May or June, so we certainly have time to look at more aspects of this rather than just to put it into a policy before we've looked at all the considerations. We need to look at what the market is, what we're spending on it, what staff are getting. I mean, there are lots of different ways to slice that, and so I would hate to put it into a policy at this point.
Do you see that differently than the information we received on salary and the philosophy that we just put together?
Mhm.
How?
Well, for example, we know that what the district spends per employee on benefits is with the market. So how that gets, I don't think it makes any sense to cap benefits or require a certain payment by the staff and the board. I don't think that makes any sense in terms of the overall cost of the district.
Well, then you could put in your compensation policy, which is what this is, that you support exactly what we're doing today, and that should be going forward. I mean, it doesn't, in my opinion, make sense to have a compensation policy that we're developed based on a study and not include that part. If you think it should say exactly what we're doing today is what we should continue forward, that doesn't mean there shouldn't be a section in here ratifying that and you acknowledging what we're doing and that it's the right thing.
But I don't know what is the right thing. I don't have enough information.
But you know that going to the market for salaries and being at the midpoint and adjusting it, and you know all those things are the right thing.
About salary.
Okay, and you don't know what the right thing is on benefits.
Mm-mm. I think that,
Okay,
I don't know what the right thing is.
well, would you be willing to discuss it in January?
Of course.
Okay. Well, I think
I
it
don't know
should
if we'll have enough
eventually end up in,
information.
May I interject?
okay.
You know, I want to be very careful here, and it's critical y'all understand. Compensation policy was not in my scope. I mean, I provided James, here's some stuff you want to look at, here's some questions you want to ask yourself, but so I don't want to say anything that's inappropriate.
No,
but-
that's our job, it's the policy part, right?
Well, it
No.
is, but what I think I'm hearing is if we're going to solidify the salaries piece, let's solidify the benefits piece as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what I'm hearing. I would say, and my assumption here is that you use a benefits broker to go out and survey the market and look at what benefits are going to cost and what different plans are going to cost.
That
and different
isn't something the board's involved in at all.
No, I agree, but
Yeah.
I guess what I'm saying though is I would view the involvement of that broker to be similar to the involvement that I had in solidifying the compensation plan. I mean, generally speaking, the broker who's interacting with these people, who's looking at and again, it is done by staff, but that assessment, that analysis, the plan for how you're going to make changes to benefits is something that is determined in consultation with that professional. I mean, so I think that what you have is you have sequential paths. You've solidified the salary piece because I'm the outside advisor you used for the salary piece. the outside advisor you use for the benefits piece would be that broker, they're that intermediary, and I don't know what the schedule for that is, but I think maybe that's where potentially some of kind of the disconnect is. Does that make any sense at all?
No, but go ahead.
Mr. Whisker?
Personally, I'm not opposed to weaving in things in the policy if we understand what we're trying to accomplish. In the policy, would we be looking for it to define the process with which we're reviewing benefits and the board's involvement, or tie to, expressly tie to some position with regards to the healthcare market like we have done with salary?
I think
Both.
it makes sense to approach it the
'Cause I
way you
haven't seen
have
that.
with salary, which is doing both of those things. But if there's some pressure that I'm not aware of to approve a compensation policy in January without taking the time that others want to address benefits, then I'd love to know what that is. I just think they should both be done together because they relate to each other. They're actually, in that first statement, you say that they're both related. We have information on both, so
Right.
just because the renewal's in March or May doesn't mean we can't have an opinion on where we want to go and what we want to do.
Right. And like I said, my disclaimer, TL's given his, is that this is new territory for me. And my perspective is, and I've got some slides on this, so this was a pause on the policy, heard the question about policy. I can kind of move into cost to implement. I've got some slides on benefit costs.
Oh, it's okay. My question was
And-
on the policy.
Right. But I think
Putting
it's
it
kind
in
of
the-
part of what I'm looking for clarity on tonight is exactly that. We've talked earlier, and some of my next slides are about how is all this dovetail? How does the board want this to come together vis-a-vis the benefit schedule, the data that we have on salary, policy, and when you actually want to pull the trigger on paying people? So I've got some thoughts on that.
So is
With-
there any time crunch on January 10th? Is that
It's
a
the process,
significant
no, it's,
date?
I mean, as I'll show you in a minute, that's just the process that we've outlined and
Okay.
communicated, is that we would do the market study, that we would present that information, we would adopt the pay structure, we'd move through compensation policy and cons to implement salary, and then we'd then move into benefits renewal. That's what I've outlined and we've discussed, and I know you and I have had a conversation about maybe we're out of sync on that, and preference would be to bring them together. There is no time pressure. Nothing is going to happen. The pressure on the policy or January 10th is simply to move forward and implement the salary stuff, and I serve at the pleasure of the board. If you want to wait and bring all of the benefit information together, we can look at how to do that. And I have some thoughts on schedule that are sort of hurriedly pulled together, and I can step through those. My perspective on the compensation stuff is it seems like there's less variables. You go to the market, you look at the benchmark organizations, here's the comps, here's the salary, and you adopt your structure, and you know that you're using some index to move that every year. Whereas the benefits market, just based on my very limited knowledge, seems a lot more complicated. We could change plans. We could offer 4 plans. A lot of the benchmark organizations that we actually looked at offer 3 or 4 plans. We offer 1. So how the decisions on that and how you want to write those in there, if you want them in there, we probably should take the time to figure all that out and look at that comprehensively. And I think that's guidance I'd be looking for from the board. Because I don't know what you would be looking for. And the compensation policies that I've looked at don't get that granular in here's our benefits plan, unless you're then going to review your compensation policy annually every time you update benefits and decide to switch plans or change contribution. So what I would ask is, what level of specificity would you imagine would actually be in here?
I would say it's similar to what you have for compensation, where you have a market that you've gone out and established, but that isn't in that policy, right? And you've decided midpoint is where you want to be. And in a benefits one, you decide where you want to be within the market. It doesn't say which plans, or that policy in front of you right now doesn't say who your comparables are, which are a policy decision. But it's not specific in there, right?
No, it's not.
So, I mean, you keep it general, if that's what you're wanting as a compensation policy. Then it's general guidelines, just like you're applying to your compensation or your salary.
Right. What else would we, and I can move on and then we could circle back to it too, but obviously you've accepted the study results and we've sort of defined our market as the benchmark organizations that responded, and we surveyed those same organizations for benefits. So we can write down what those organizations are, both for pay.
No, I don't
and
think
for
you should.
benefits.
I don't want to be tied to those, actually. They're all 10 times, most of them are 10 times bigger than us, so.
So how would we define which are the benchmark organizations?
Just like you, I wouldn't define it. I'm
Oh.
saying it isn't defined in your current policy.
Right.
So
How
you
would
don't
you
need to
define
define
market?
it in, I would use the word market like he has in his current policy.
So the policy would say benefits, we would try to stay at market with benefits.
Just like his current one says on salary,
Mhm.
at midpoint of market. You don't go into granular detail on that, do you? In the existing policy you have drafted before us?
I don't understand how you have midpoint of market.
That's what we're putting down as our
With
compensation
salary
policy right now.
on health, on benefits. I don't see how you'd say, we're gonna go to the midpoint of benefits and know what that means.
You
midpoint
can
of
go to the
market.
market average, you sure can.
Well, how do you define market average?
Well, we have
It's what you're
the data.
offering, what you're spending, what employees are getting. I mean, it's not one thing. It isn't dollars.
So, I know well. I think it can be done. If you don't want to discuss it in January, that's fine. I don't know that this venue in a board meeting right now is the place to go through that, but we sure can if you want to keep going through that. I guess my big issue is I would ask anecdotally, who of your employers offers you 100% family coverage paid plus $1,400 towards your $4,000?
See, that's an
deductible?
example. You're
No,
talking what they're getting, not about what we're spending.
And I'm not telling you what the solution is, Sherry. I'm telling you, here's an issue, here's the problem I have. If you'd like to solve it in whatever way you see fit, that's fine. I'm just saying, I see an issue that concerns me with benefits, and I think it's important to tie it with compensation. If you don't want to address it, that's your right as the board, as long as you're aware. That's my concern, that's my issue. And I've been trying to help address it, and if we don't want to address it, that's the majority's will, that's fine. But that is my concern, and I think it's valid.
I do want to address it when we have enough information. We have here that we're saying compensation is both salary and benefits.
That's
That's
what
a
it says,
policy,
yeah.
if we adopt this policy.
Yeah.
And I think that then we go on to look at what is available there, what the facts are, what the possibilities are.
I'd love to see you do that, yeah, I think that's great.
But I don't think it should hold like this, or hold up
I do.
representation salary.
I do,
Well, then we wouldn't have a policy. Well,
but there's no time crunch on it.
Excuse me?
I don't believe there's a time crunch on it,
On a policy?
correct?
But you wouldn't want to hold up your limitation of salary.
I don't think it would, but you can correct me if I'm wrong.
I don't see, yeah. This is about, I just don't see why we'd need to wait. We could do this and then come back to benefits as a separate piece.
What I said, Dick, was I just said, the board can come up with whatever solution they want, but I have a concern when, if I ask most people in a room, does their employer pay for 100% of their family coverage plus give a $1,400 contribution towards a $4,000 deductible? I think it's out of sync. And I don't know what the right answer is. I'm not trying to tell you what the right answer is, but if you don't want to address the concern, that's fine. But I can't support not dealing with it. And I think the right time to do it is when you're dealing with compensation. And you can move forward without addressing that, that's fine. That's my position. I respect that we're trying to accomplish getting employees to market, and I support that. But I also feel it's the time to address that concern that I've brought up before, so
Mr.
that's
Westner?
my position.
Thank you. Mr. Westner?
I have a few slides here, including just a summary of what's in the packet, which includes our benefit plan, percent contribution costs, as well as just the process that we laid out and how we might pivot if we want to. I don't know if you want me to step through that and.
One moment, Manager Becker.
I'd like to ask Manager Loftus why she thinks these have to be done together.
Well, I have a few reasons. I think it's best to do them together. I don't think leaving HR issues lingering longer just because renewal is in May or March doesn't mean we have to wait to deal with it. I think we also have a study in front of us that we just accepted that has results for both salary and benefits. And I think it's a time, if you're going to say, we need to correct some of where we're at with benefits, the right time to pair that up is when you're also giving employees significant raises. I think those are good reasons to deal with them at the same time.
But they are independent decisions.
They could be, but I believe they should be linked together. I think our philosophy right now addresses both, and I think it could address benefits more fully.
Well, if you link two independent things, you don't get dependence.
But why are benefits and salary mentioned in our compensation philosophy? Should we remove that word then?
No, it's competitively positioned. That is important in that sentence. So you can make independent decisions and come up with a competitive position.
But it says combine to competitively.
If they're made independently, they will combine competitively. There's transitiveness.
How they combine to competitively position the market. Well, I've shared, I guess, my reasons why it's a good time to look at them. I also don't feel any time pressure to not deal with it. I guess I don't know why I'd leave a big concern out on the table. Why?
So there might be some incentive to dig into the benefits question if salaries are being held up.
I'm not saying hold them up. No one's saying not to implement them. I'm saying don't approve a policy. I don't think implementing the study and having a policy are, do you need the policy approved before you implement them? We've approved the range, correct?
Correct.
So do you need a policy in order to implement them?
Well, one of the things that's on the docket, Manager Loftus managers, with regards to implementing, certainly the policy gives a level of guidance on what you want me to do, but then also we discussed as part of the process and scheduled for December 10th was what is the cost to implement the pay structure that we have. So we have a pay structure.
Right.
And we've talked about implementing that, and we worked through, 3 or 4 different scenarios with the liaisons through iterations of in budget, over budget, less over budget with a budget amendment. And that was scheduled to come forward on December 10th. So you don't need the policy, but if you want to link the two, that was on the table too. And like I said, I'm happy to kind of step through why we'd set it up the way that we did, what our benefits plan looks like, and how we might pivot and what we might bring forward on December 10th, both in committee and at the board meeting. I just look for clear direction from the board of you.
Thank you. Manager Miller.
First of all, I have more information tonight than I've had in 2 decades of serving on this board about HR and compensation. And I'm really pleased where we are, on this analysis. And I think changeover in the whole mission and vision and et cetera, and reorganizing staff, everything. And I think it's, I agree with the concept of examining them both. It makes sense. But I really feel an urgency to implement the compensation program. And, you know, as soon as possible, because it's going to, James will be here a year, and we laid this thing out as a need. We did all the reorganization. And frankly, you know, there could be several new members of the board in January where this could be left in limbo for a while, and I think it would have a detrimental effect on the staff. So I think we should act on the compensation part of it. And
Well, I respect everyone's position on that. I do.
well, I respect your position because I think it makes sense, but I got other concerns of it.
Yeah. I would put that as your recruitment ad. Those benefits are unheard of. We should be advertising that.
I think we do.
Benefits.
Huh?
Unheard of benefits in the
Yeah.
byline.
I think, if I could ask a question. Manager Loftus, I'd understood from our conversation that you had concerns actually implementing, and so I just want to get clarity on like what's the
But that's not related to the benefit part. I mean, separately, I strongly believe we should stay in budget, if that's what you mean.
Perhaps I misunderstood. I thought that there was a concern actually implementing the pay structure without defining a position on benefits.
I have an issue with that, yeah, which I think I've stated.
Okay.
And I also respect the other board members where they're going. So yeah, I think.
I know that you have more material, so let's go ahead and see go through the rest of the discussion items. And then we'll try to round this off and see where we're going to go from here.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know that it's going to be a super linear segue based on where we were with the discussion, but I can kind of outline how we got to this point and the process that we laid out, and then we can talk about how do we want things to come together, what can we do in January. So part of the process that we'd worked through was outlining when we'd gotten the pay structure, we'd met with the liaisons, was how are we going to implement the salary. And so we'd looked at cost to implement scenarios, and we'd gone back and forth with those, and we brought two options forward to committee for consideration. And we'd said these would be tied to this broad philosophy that we would then translate into a policy to be adopted on January 10th, which is the policy that's in front of you, and informs those cost to implement options. And one of them is implementing the salary adjustments within budget, which touches 67% of our employees and moves that 67% to market minimum. And outlined in your packet, it overviews the amount that's left for movement beyond that market minimum, tied to some of the criteria or guideposts that are in your policy. Option two, because the salaries that people are currently paid with the job adjustments are considerably behind range, option two provides movement for a number of people beyond that market minimum. And so there's a budget amendment consideration there. And we talked about that could be paid for through the operational reserves that we have on hand. The question becomes, I suppose, if you want to look at benefits, which we don't renew until May, and we don't know how the costs are going to increase, if you want to change the plans that you're offering, how you want to restructure the HRA, how do you want to make a decision on salary at the same time as benefits, when we do have a market survey of benefits and we know what our proportional contribution is relative to benchmark organizations. We know what a cost per FTE is relative to benchmark organizations, but we don't know what we're going to do. We don't know if we're going to change plans, and we haven't had our broker go to the market and tell us, is it a 12% increase, an 18% increase? And so having all of the information on how are we adjusting salary, how are we adjusting benefits, to me, think is the question that everybody's getting at, and it's mainly one of timing, and how much information do you need to feel comfortable making a decision on both? And do you want to, I can't say this eloquently as Manager Becker, but do you want to do those independently and still look at it comprehensively, or do they need to happen the exact same time in January or February before you go out with the broker and get information? So this is the information that was summarized in the packet. It's out there in the packet with regards to what our benefit plans are. And so, you know, we have a high deductible plan that's age bracketed, and we provide, the deductible is paid for by employee contributions to HSA, and then there's a portion of the HRA that, as Manager Loftus points out, the district has been contributing towards. The deductibles are $2,000 for individual, $4,000 for family, and then our costs, the average cost per year per FTE is around $10,800. The market average from the survey results that we got was $12,963, and again, that's an average, and it's based on a whole variety of factors where some organizations are providing multiple plans and all sorts of different variables. And then there's the contribution to the high deductible plan from a percent contribution basis, which is what Manager Loftus is pointing out, is the watershed district provides 100% contribution to the employee's premium, I should say, for that high deductible plan. And it's doing that for individuals, it's doing that for individuals with spouse, and it's doing that for individuals with family. And you can see some of the range there, that when you get down to family, the average from the benchmark organizations we sampled, the average percent contribution towards a premium from those organizations is around 82%. There were organizations in the sample that do what we do, 100%. And of course, there's organizations that do less, and that's how you get your average. The conversation that I had with Manager Loftus earlier today, and I've been legitimately struggling to wrap my head around, is I would think part of the decision for the board is what's the bottom line, how much are you paying in salary, how much is your total outlay for benefits, and what is your competitive position on contributing to both relative to the market. And from a cash perspective, the district is paying around what the market average is. And so you can certainly look at the percent contribution. I think that's valuable to look at as one of the variables. And then there's the dollars. And then there's all the toggles with regards to the types of plan you offer, high deductible, low deductible, the number of the plans. And I think the process that we had laid out really was staged. I apologize if I contributed to confusion, because it's always my goal to try and lay things out clearly and not arrive at a junction point like this where we're seemingly in conflict. January 10th, we were looking at action on that policy and action on salary adjustments. And then between March and May, what I had outlined, what I thought we would do is we would look at the projected changes in the healthcare costs, because a broker is going to tell us, here's how the market's changing. And they would be able to look at, do you want to stay with Health Partners or go to Blue Cross? Do you want to stay high deductible or low deductible? What happens if you offer multiple plans and people self-select out of a high deductible plan, and that saves us money? Synthesize those options with the survey data, which show what our cost per FTE is and the percent contribution, and then look at that. Look at what decision you want to make regarding benefits. And you may even say, well, we want to get out of this off fiscal year cycle, and we want to renew benefits for 18 months so that we can finally sync up benefits with salary, so that they're all happening at the same time from a budgeting perspective. But I thought that if you had all that information, you could look at through the budgeting process, how do we implement this, and how do you want to implement it over time with regards to toggling your benefits and toggling your salary, knowing that you've got a policy and the pay plan, and you have your benefit information, that you could then make decisions about 2020, 2021, and figure out what the fiscal impact is to the organization and what the fiscal impact is to the employee. And I'm only just starting to figure some of this stuff out, but I think there are instances where if you just said, we want to be market competitive with the percent contribution, there could be instances where, based on where the majority of people are moving with the range shift and the percent growth in healthcare costs this year, that somebody in the organization isn't getting a substantial pay increase based on staying in budget on salary. And if you cap your contribution on benefits, their net take home at the end of the year is less. And those are policy decisions. I'm not lobbying one way or the other, but I think that you should have that information and fully consider it, because I want to make sure that the board has the clarity they need to make the right decision for the organization, and that we can clearly communicate what we're doing and why we're doing it for staff, so that people can feel good or bad about it respectively, but understand why. And I don't know that we have that information, and like I said, if that's a result of me not getting things done on time or lack of clarity, that's my deal. But that was the process that we laid out, and that was some of the rationale behind it. Now, for January 10th, I still think you can act on the compensation policy, but maybe you don't want to, and that's fine. We can do whatever we want. At a minimum, we can certainly bring back more granular detail on benefits and have a more informed conversation. You are still going to be missing what's coming and what's going to happen, and that decision on what you're going to do is not until May. And so, we had a great conversation earlier today, and I've been sort of struggling with what is the path forward, and we talked about I was supposed to come back with a recommendation. I think really the next step is to come back, the operations committee, and just present as much of the sort of benefit analysis as possible and see how it pairs up with the salary. And either you'll be comfortable moving forward on January 24th. I don't think you're going to turn around out of committee and make a decision on policy, salary, and benefits between now and January 10th. So I think we could present more information on the benefit stuff on the 10th, and you'll let me know if we're comfortable bringing it all together on the 24th, or if we're doing these things independently. I don't know if that helped or made things more confusing.
I'm not an expert on HR. I've never supervised more than one person, and but I was in part of an organization that had 260,000 employees, and everything was uniform. Everything got lowered down to the lowest common denominator every time they acquire another bank. But I owned a company, half of a company with 150 employees, and things just change. I was just amazed when I had to get involved in HR stuff, how complicated the market is on like benefits. It's just I think we're out of sync a little bit, but I don't think it's expensively out of sync. I think it looks worse on paper out of sync than it actually is. But it's I really don't want to. It makes sense what you say, but I don't want to delay this compensation part of it. I want to get it out of the way, so that we can. I have a sense that it isn't that it's out of sync, but the cost isn't that great. I think we should bring it back into sync, but I don't think it's something that should overwhelm our decision on compensation at this time.
I hear you. I respect your thoughts on it.
So this is not a decision point, it's a discussion item, but we could bring forward on January 10th the implementation, the policy, and in committee a discussion of benefits with additional information, and that is available at the time on January 10th. We won't have a lot of information, we have some. And we have 4 of us tonight, perhaps we'll have 7 on January 10th.
I'd like to know why at 100% of premiums, We are $2,000 less than the market.
So
You're
let me,
comparing against agencies that are 10 times our size and they employ police officers.
there's, and if I might interject, that is, it's an accurate number, it's a yardstick, but you do have to be careful because of those variables. The age of your workforce impacts your benefits costs. Right? I mean, there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. You know, you can attempt to normalize and do an apples to apples comparison, but it is extremely difficult. The purpose of that is really to give the agency a feel for what its out-of-pocket cost is in relation to what other agencies are spending. You know, so that's why you see those variables. I don't want to get involved in the policy. What I think I've heard is, I'm going to oversimplify it. You have $1 to spend. You're trying to determine what piece of that dollar goes to salaries and what piece of that dollar goes to benefits. I mean, that's what this discussion is fundamentally. And the challenge you're faced with as the governing body, and the challenge staff has, is because of your timelines, you have to make decisions on those without knowing what the impact's going to be. You're doing salary decisions based on a fiscal year, and you're doing benefits decisions 5 months after that. Is that a fairly accurate statement? I mean, is that so? You know, I think James' suggestion to maybe try to do a benefits renewal this time that gets you on the same schedule is a good one, because I think, to your point, that puts you in a position going forward to say, okay, we know healthcare is going to go up whatever percentage. We know that the market has moved by whatever percentage. We now have this dollar. We know what it's going to cost to implement both of these things. How do we want to split that dollar up? I think being on the same schedule would enable you to have that kind of meaningful conversation. I think the obstacle right now you're facing is you're implementing a new pay plan effective tonight. I mean, you know, you approve the new structure, but you don't know what the increase in benefits are going to be and things like that until March, April, May timeframe. I mean, it is a challenge. But I think that trying to put them on the same schedule, unless I've misinterpreted, I think that allows you going forward to have the kind of meaningful conversation you're looking to have now, because you don't have the data. That makes any sense?
Feels like an artificial constraint to me, but I hear what you're saying.
Well, I think the reality is we did the analysis based on benefits that are going to be changing 3 or 4 months from now. I mean, so that, if you were to say, hey, we want our family contribution to be 82%, I think on January 10th, you don't know what that's 82% of. I mean, I think that's really the challenge is if you, and maybe I've misinterpreted, but I think that's what you're trying to solidify is this is what our contribution is going to be. You use the midpoint, but what you're saying is, okay, what's the average contribution to family? What's the average contribution to employee and spouse? What's the average contribution to employee and child? And
it doesn't matter because I'm in the minority on this, but I wasn't trying to move us there immediately in 5 months. I was saying, let's not keep where we're headed. Let's set a goal of 82% and get there slowly. And not that employees would take a big chunk of that healthcare premium. They just wouldn't get the increased cost, the incremental increase. And that would take years, James, if you do the math, it's not 1 year. It would take years to slowly slow that contribution down and catch up to the market, is the way I envisioned it. So I think it isn't a matter of knowing specifics. It's a matter of this is our philosophy, and this is where I think we should head. Not that we get there instantly.
so it's just a matter of articulating that's
Philosophy and the policy of where we want to go. If we want to go to the midpoint in the market for salaries, well, this is where we want to go for benefits. I don't need specifics to tell you that. You know what I mean? So but it doesn't matter. This conversation, honestly, is not in the right venue and isn't productive at this point. So I'll just stop talking.
So we're not going to have unanimity, but should we bring this forward as part action item, part can be discussion or presentation on benefits to the degree we can.
I think you guys are on the same page. I'm the one who has the concern regarding offering benefits that aren't in sync with what the normal general population is offered. My concern is out there. You know where I'll be voting, and I respect the position of everybody up here, and we move forward with the majority. But you know why I'll be voting no on it all. Because
Understood.
yeah, and that is a concern for me, so.
Mr. Whisker?
Can I ask, is there any interest in the interest of unanimity in bringing the benefit information forward to the best degree we can on the 10th, and then just simply looking to the 24th for the policy and implementation? I know that there's an interest in not delaying, but that would be 2 weeks, and we could sort of take stock of where we are based on presentation of the information we have about benefits and projections, and haven't done the math and probably should.
So what would be delayed till the 24th?
Well, you could push the compensation policy and any decisions regarding implementing the salary until the 24th, which I'm sure staff won't be super happy with, but it would allow you on the 10th to have more informed discussion around benefits and feel comfortable or still uncomfortable about the decision you're making on the 24th.
Well, we're gonna have an informed conversation on benefits. I mean, we know what the concerns are, you know, they should be in sync with the market. And, but I don't want to delay the conversation for that. I think it's a separate, it should be taken into account when the total cost for both, but it shouldn't, one shouldn't be dependent on the other.
And I would just say, for the record, that I don't necessarily believe that that's the definition of market either. So, you know, so that's not even, I don't want to give on that point at all. And I don't want to delay compensation of the implementation either. And it's not like we're bringing everybody to where we want them to be. We're just bringing everyone to at least the minimum and then a little bit more movement. So it isn't as if we're totally fixing salary and leaving benefits on the table either, because salary needs more work. So I would not like to delay implementation. So we'll put implementation on the agenda for the 10th.
No
Yes.
action tonight?
This is a discussion action,
Okay.
so yeah. A discussion item, I should say. All right, 3 nods.
Very well. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm glad we're only gonna do this every 5 years.
Probably not doing it. Not even doing it once.
And the last item is the administrator's report.
I actually have nothing to report.
Excellent.
But I will extend my sincere thanks to the board and staff for a great year. I think 2018's been really filled with change, learning, a lot of accomplishments, and growth for the organization and people, and I really look forward to the challenges and opportunities of 2019 as we keep striving for that next level. So everybody have a happy holidays, safe new year. Unless there's questions, that's the essence of my report.
Were you wanting to weigh in?
No, Madam Chair and managers, I just had one quick item that doesn't really have a great place to fit otherwise, but did want to bring to the manager's attention super briefly that the Corps of Engineers and EPA released on December 11th a new definition of waters of the United States that's very significant change to that rule and will change the Corps' jurisdiction over wetlands mostly, and assure the managers that it is an item that we're tracking again, as we've discussed in the past, it does not affect the watershed district's jurisdiction or its scope of its work it can do, but it changes the frame within which you're working on a national level.
Is there any ability for us or need to change our interest in the wetlands or increase it or?
I would recommend in a broad way that the watershed district maintain its vigilance and engagement on wetlands. I think the district has a very high level of engagement, especially when you look at the work you're doing in 6 Mile Creek. But it may be that when the dust is settled on this rule, you want to revisit your scope of your wetland work.
So can we look to Smith Partners for a briefing when this is, as you say, the dust is settled? We're talking about water, but we're talking about dust settling.
We can do a briefing whenever the managers wish. The comment period is open on the preliminary rule until February 10th or so, 60 days after that December 11th issuance.
Is this under the jurisdiction of the Interior Department or?
It's EPA and the Corps of Engineers combined jurisdiction. They set the waters of the United States.
EPA,
Yeah, yeah.
It takes away some of the actors in some of the projects.
Okay.
Especially someplace like Louisiana, it'll be very significant. Not in states like Minnesota where you have such a robust, multi-level wetlands framework.
Okay.
Did you have?
Stay tuned.
I didn't. I don't know if you were done yet when I recognized.
I handed it off to him.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone. We are adjourned.